I'd like to call this meeting to order this evening. Please stand and join me in saying the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Roll call this evening. All directors are present with the exception of Director Velasquez, who is unable to join us this evening. We will have a brief business meeting for a few business items that need attention to, and when we are done, we will adjourn and move on to our study session this evening. Could I have a motion to approve the business part of our meeting this evening?
So made.
By Julie, a second. By Jonathan. All in favor, say aye, please.
Aye.
Opposed? That carries 7-0. All right, first up, we are talking about the board resolution related to the school board election. Dr. Thomas.
Thank you, Chair Nelson, Board Directors. This evening, we have a resolution for you to consider adopting pertaining to the election of school board members, as we have one coming up this November. So I'll turn that to you all for consideration to adopt.
Great. So this evening, we will be taking a vote on the resolution relating to election of school board members and calling the school district general election. And I will just make a note at this time, the filing date has passed, so all names will stand as listed on the Secretary of State website and in the board packet this evening. Do I have a motion to approve this resolution?
Made.
By Amy, a second.
Second.
By Mary. This is a roll call vote. Jonathan?
Aye.
Julie?
Aye.
Mary?
Aye.
Stacy?
Aye.
Amy?
Aye.
Aye. That passes 6-0 this evening. Thank you. Okay, next up, we are going to talk about approving contracts. I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Thomas.
Thank you. Yeah, this evening, we have two contracts that we would like to speak to. Tammy Frederickson, our Executive Director of Business Services, will speak to the content of this related for our secondary support for our MinCaps program, and then our partnership with Normandale Community College for college credits for our students. And with that, I'll turn it over to Tammy.
Thank you, Dr. Thomas. These two contracts are the same two contracts that we've had in the past. Nothing new with them. There is budget for them, so we're recommending approval of the two contracts.
Okay. Would you like us to approve them independently or together? Does it matter for your sake? Okay. Board, are you comfortable taking them in one vote? Do I have a motion to approve the contracts as listed with Hennepin Tech and Normandale?
So made.
By Amy. Do I have a second?
Second.
By Jonathan. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Any comments or questions? That was late. All right.
That was a lot of order.
I was out of order. I'm sorry, Mary, did you have comments and questions?
Yes, and I'm sorry if they were answered via email, but is the Normandale contract the only contract we have with them that's here? Do you know?
As far as I'm aware, yes.
Okay, because I thought we had a PSEO contract with them also.
I will check.
Okay. I know that there's been other contracts. We had a creative writing contract and a few other things going on in the last couple years.
That's a good, now that I'm thinking about that, it might be different in that the teachers teaching those classes in the high school.
It's through Normandale. We pay
It is
Normandale
through
for the Spanish
Normandale,
ones.
but yeah. And
So,
then
yeah.
that NC English.
Right.
Yeah, yeah. So I know there are other ones, but I wonder how those are done.
Normally through PSEO, there is a state formula that the colleges will get credit for, and we just do the reporting on it.
Okay,
But I'll double check to make sure that there's nothing different than
okay.
what we normally do.
Yeah, I thought that the Spanish one was taught in the high school through Normandale, or the materials were brought from Normandale and a few other things. But that may change year to year based upon availability. But it would be nice to know, because I know that previous years,
And
it's varied.
am I correct that this wouldn't impact the contract we are voting on right now?
Yeah.
Okay.
Correct.
Very good. All right, thank you for that, and that vote stands, and I will get my order correct next time. Thank you. Next up, personnel items. Dr. Thomas.
Yes, this evening we've got, I'll talk about 5.C.1, and then I'll turn it over to Emily for the rest. But as you all are aware, Jim Querum and his family are getting ready to move to Texas, and he has taken an opportunity to move down there with his family. And it's bittersweet. I'm happy for him, but he was a great dynamic leader here in our organization, and we will definitely miss having him here. In the meantime, as we get ready to assess how we'll move forward with those critical functions and roles, we are weeks away from starting school and starting out a search for this level of position. You know, our star candidates are already placed elsewhere, and so we have an internal candidate that we know will definitely be able to step up and really, I think, carry the work in Jim's absence, and that is Emily, who is sitting in his place this evening, that you all know. And she and I and Jim have had extensive conversation around alignment opportunities for us to have an interim structure and then go through this year into the spring, and then we would revise or revisit and look at the structure to see how it's been operating for the year, and then determine a final process that we would then post for any permanent changes. You know, one of the things I want the board and the community to know is that I believe in a fair, open, transparent, competitive process for positions. I don't believe in placing unless you have, you know, very unique situations such as this, where we can, you know, make some adjustments very quickly in need be. But also in having conversations with Emily, she also is very committed to doing this work, and should this be something that continues of interest, then obviously she also wants to compete and be recognized for her leadership. So I want to thank her in advance for stepping forward to really fill this opportunity for us. And subsequently, we've had some discussion in terms of, well, how do we then adjust the structure with her current position? And through our conversations, we believe that we can adjust her position to fill a different need that was pressing, but because of limited resources, we were challenged as to how we might be able to bring resources around that need, and that is benefits coordination. As you all are probably aware, managed care and being self-insured has become increasingly complex each year, and having a significant load of the need of benefits coordinations within our district is something that we've really been putting on two other individuals within the HR department, and it's becoming almost impossible to do that, as well as, you know, manage the licensed and non-licensed support throughout the district. So through some analysis, we are able to actually save dollars in bringing on a benefits coordinator for the rest of this year, and we will be posting for that position, and then, you know, based upon the interest, if we have any other internal interest of that position, that could then cascade or domino, you know, an opening. We're very prepared to address any kind of internal changes and or welcome any external folks as well to that process. But I think that's a need that we've both identified to say that we will not fill her current role. Rather, we'll put those resources around that benefits coordination component and then go from there. And so that's what you have in terms of the admin change memo, just giving you all some more context. And again, a very forward-facing position, so I wanted to make sure that our community understood the thinking and the rationale behind that change. So with that, I turn it back over to you, Chair Nelson.
Okay, and I will just clarify, we'll do a motion second and then questions. Can we take both of these items in one vote? Or do you want them separate?
I'll leave it to you.
Okay, board?
I think
Unless you need to pull them for discussion? Okay.
Okay, all right.
All right, do we have a motion to move forward with approving the Director of Human Resources to Interim Executive Director of Administrative Services from September 6th, 2022 through June 30th, 2023, and the addition of a 1.0 FTE benefits specialist? Do I have a motion? By Julie, do I have a second?
Second.
Stacy? All right, comments and questions? Anybody?
I had one question. I'm not quite sure I understand the cost savings of 60,000 that's put in here. Is that because of how we're posting the job, the rate, the level that it's at, and the replacement, the delta?
Yeah,
Is that-
I'll let Emily address that.
Yes, that's a total compensation package comparison for salary and benefits contract terms and conditions compared from taking the director position and replacing it with the benefit specialist. So it's a total cost savings.
Okay, that makes more sense. Okay, thank you.
Any other comments or questions? All right, all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? That carries 6-0 this evening. Thank you. Next up, Dr. Thomas, the approval of the MSEA contract.
Yes, and again, I'm very pleased with our team to enter into negotiations to really, I think, be very creative with the resources that we have to find a mutual agreement with our MSEA group. And so with that, I'll have Emily kind of walk us through that process and where we landed.
And so we're very excited to bring forward the MSEA contract for your consideration for approval. It was a very productive, very respectful process, and we feel we made some significant progress to move that contract forward for comparables that we feel will significantly help our district recruit and retain our paraeducators. And so we're bringing it forward for consideration of approval tonight.
Great, thank you. Let's start with a motion to approve the MSEA contract.
So made.
By Stacy. Do I have a second?
Second.
By Amy. Comments and questions?
I'll make a comment.
Go ahead, Stacy.
I just want to make a comment and thank both our staff and the Minnesota School Association's representatives for, a thoughtful, productive process. I think this bargaining unit of all bargaining units, we're the most behind in needing to catch up to be internal comps and externally. And it's with this that I know our Human Resource Department is going to be pretty excited to be able to be competitive, at least in our area. We've lost and have had serious vacancies in our paras. And so this will hopefully bring, that much needed staff there. So I just want to thank everyone for the efforts. And especially Tammy too, as just kind of taking a fresh look at it and being able to get that agreement done fairly quickly. So, thank you.
Other comments or questions? Okay, we have a motion and,
First of all, I want to second what Stacy said because we've gone through this for quite some time, and I'm very, very happy. And I'm also happy that it happened so smoothly, and everyone ended up really coming out ahead in the process. So thanks to Emily. I think, this is your first negotiation?
It's my first time leading.
First time leading. Well, you did a great job. So thank you. And then the other thing is I would just request that, we get a copy of the contract, because that's normal process that we
we
be
did
able to
get
get.
it.
Oh, we did? It came in the mail just
In your
recently?
email.
Came in
Okay,
today.
okay, sorry.
Oh, that's
I was
okay.
at work, so,
That's fine.
thank
Good.
you.
And I'm sorry I missed you. You got to give me one of these next time if I
Oh.
miss you. Any other comments or questions? Jonathan, go ahead.
I'll give you one of those. One more echo of kudos to the two of you for getting it done and for their bargaining team for getting it done. There are, I don't know that there are any more unsung heroes in our buildings than our paras, and I'm just grateful that we've changed that package in a way that hopefully will keep them and get more.
Any other waves in the air? Okay. We do have a motion and a second. This time, I will take a vote to approve the MSEA contract. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That carries 6-0 this evening. Next up, we have the approval of candidates for employment.
Yes, I'll have Emily walk us through those recommendations.
Right, so for item 5C3, we're bringing forward the recommendation to approve the candidates for employment as listed in the packet.
Okay, and normally these items would typically be under our consent agenda, so we'll individually approve them this evening if that, does that make sense for everybody? Okay, so at this point, do I have a motion to approve the candidates for employment as listed?
So made.
By Amy, do I have a second?
Second? Second?
by Mary. Any comments or questions? All in favor of approving the candidates for employment as listed, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, that carries 6-0 this evening. Next up, approval of leaves.
So for 5C4, we're bringing forward the recommendation of approval of leaves as listed in the packet.
Okay, do I have a motion to approve the leaves as listed in our packet this evening? By Julie, do I have a second?
Second.
By Stacy, any comments or questions? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? That carries 6-0 this evening.
And then the final item for 5C is 5C5, and we're bringing forward the recommendation of approval of resignations as listed in the packet.
Okay, do I have a motion to approve the list of resignations as listed in our packet this evening?
So made.
By Mary.
Second, Julie.
Second by Julie. Comments or questions? All right, all those in favor of approving the resignations as listed in our board packet this evening, please say aye.
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 Opposed? That carries 6-0 this evening. Thank you. I believe that concludes the business items that needed our attention this evening. So I would entertain a motion to adjourn the meeting so we can move on to study session.
So made.
By Stacy. Do I have a second?
Second.
By Jonathan. All those in favor of adjourning to transition to study session, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? That carries 6-0. Okay. Dr. Thomas, purpose and agenda.
Thank you, Chair Nelson, Board of Directors. This evening, we are going to engage around a work session pertaining to the strategic directives, I guess, for the district. And just to give some context again, the district engaged in this process several years ago with an external consultant to develop priorities for the district. And I want to thank the board and administration of that time, as well as that consultant. Know that group really well. I've worked with them on many projects here in Minnesota, and I think came up with a good document. Upon my entry to the district and having conversations with our leadership in the district, and just one-on-one conversations with a variety of folks, I began asking questions around the priorities, which is that first document that you see there that you all developed. I think it was back 4 years ago? Yeah, about 4 years ago. And just getting a sense of where individuals were at with their work. And I know I shared this at our last board business meeting. And I think there was a lot of question around the connection to the work that were declared in the priorities. A lot of busy work happening in the district and not necessarily seeing a direct correlation to student outcomes for what we saw here. Oh, I'm sorry.
May I interrupt for one moment? I'm just wondering if you're moving ahead to a later agenda
Sorry,
item, and if you'd like to have me just
nope,
give the overview
nope.
first.
Yeah, why don't you?
And I don't mind going in
No.
the other order.
No, I apologize.
No, it's okay.
I apologize.
I just
Go
wanted
ahead.
to- No,
Go
okay,
ahead.
very good. Anything else you want to say about the purpose of
Nope,
this evening?
that's it. Just to review our
I
district
hate to-
priorities.
You had
I
all that
apologize. I
energy
started going into it.
No, that's fine. I just wanted to make sure I was
Thank you.
following. I'm just going to briefly say that before every study session, we do take time to review the Board of Education agenda and working document that we use to do our work, to tie both our roles as school board members to the strategic plan and the goals of the district. So this evening, we will be touching on several of our board roles, district policy, including 400s, 600s, and 800s, operational oversight, which will include talking about the operational plan and priority work this evening. And we'll also be having a report on the audit and enrollment this evening. So that's how that ties to what we do in our work. And next, we will go to oversight of operations. And Dr. Thomas, I will turn it over to you in terms of the audit update. Thank you.
Thank you. And again, I apologize. Yes, I started going into other content. So tonight we'll have Tammy Frederickson walk us through the update and status of where we're at with our internal audit for the year.
Thank you, Dr. Thomas, Chair Nelson. We've had our MMKR auditors here for the last 2 weeks, 2 weeks. As of Friday, they are very close to being done. They indicated to us that at this point, they have not found any findings, which is really good news. There are no outstanding items, so they have all of the information that they need. And they are just working on the federal single audit, which they'll have done sometime in September, and then they will come back out for a day or two to finalize that. And then they will prepare their comments for the board, and we should be good to go.
Thank you. Comments or questions? Anybody? Okay. Thank you for your work on that. I look forward to that report, and I'm glad that things are moving along well. I know it's hard when you're brand new in the position to go right into an audit, so thank you for that. Next this evening, we will have a report in terms of the 2022-23 Levy certification update.
Have Tammy go ahead and hit these next two as well.
Thank you. The Department of Education levy report will come out on September 6th. It's always the day after Labor Day. We have updates to make that are due by Friday, so we're working on those to make sure that it has all the current information in there. And once they distribute the report on September 6th, we will bring it back to the study session in September for your review. The business office will recommend that you pre-certify the maximum amount of the levy, and then there will be work done in October and November to finalize that, and then we'll need a vote on it in December.
Comments or questions? Okay, and the next one is yours as well, I believe.
Yes, so we've given you some information on enrollment numbers. You can see we're a little down on our projected final enrollment for the 21-22 school year. We had projected 8,820 students, and we're about 8,644. The estimate for next year is 8,877, so we're again reviewing those numbers to make sure that the levy certification report will reflect the most accurate numbers. Because obviously the changes in enrollment has impacts on our revenue, so we are working through those. And the good news is that if we look at the kindergarten registration since June 1st, we have gained 15 kindergartners. So that's always good news if we can get kindergartners in here, and then you assume you can keep them for their K-12 experience. So that was very good news for us as we move forward.
Thank you for sharing that. Comments or questions on the enrollment update? Mary?
Tammy, what's the schedule of doing a count again? Do we get another count after 3 weeks or October 1st? Is that the date? I can't remember.
Yes, so the October 1st official child count is how the compensatory education is calculated, along with the title money for the free and reduced lunch rate. You have to be enrolled by October 1st for those to count, but you have until, it's been December 15th, although they did extend it last year to January to get final counts, just for logistics and making sure that all the families have completed the forms at the school. So, but the October 1st is the official count. We do send in a MARS report. It's a fall report. We've submitted the initial one, and then you can adjust that if there's any major changes in the enrollment throughout the year, and then you do a final MARS submission at the end of the year, which we also have submitted for the final numbers. It's very complicated the way that the Department of Education kind of calculates the ADMs, is they don't do a final for 2 years down the road. So when you look at the levy certification report, at the end of the certificate, it's like a 40-page document, and at the end of the report, there's 2 years where they do adjustments. So they'll look at your final numbers from 2 years ago, and then any of the formulas that are changed because of the ADM changes, they'll recalculate them. So sometimes you get more, sometimes you get less. And then they do that for 2 years, and then they finalize the ADM report, and then it's done. So it's kind of a 3-year process to get all of those actually totally complete. And there is opportunities to just make sure that you're getting the most accurate data during that time. But we have made the submissions that we know the numbers right now. We'll look again once school starts to see what the actual enrollment looks like, and then we can make some adjustments if we need to then.
When they go through the budget process, do we project out at all, or do we just, how does that work?
Yeah, we do a projection. So for this year, there's an enrollment projection that we use to staff schools, obviously. And then as we move forward, you'll see in the next couple months, you'll get a 5-year revenue forecast. And it's projecting out based on historical data, what the ADMs will look like for the next 5 years, and making some assumptions. And we'll list what those assumptions are as we move forward. And then kind of do the calculations based on those ADMs. But again, we're always having to adjust those as you get the actual enrollment.
Thank you.
May I,
Yes,
and
please.
just to extend an answer to Director Franz's question. So again, I think how we engage you as a board for declaring the assumptions that we will use will actually help guide the budget and get us tighter to predictability. It's not going to be perfect. You know, I don't know any way it can project the future, but we know that we have some systems that we can put into place that will give us that historical view, as well as agreeing that these are the assumptions that we're going to build now a multi-year budget forecast from. I would also add that as we go into next spring's kind of traditional budget development, we'll be reviewing the projection protocols as it pertains to them building out building-based budgets and class size projections as well. I think the challenge, having been a principal for many years, depending on the type of school, demographic you enroll, we know that some schools have full enrollment from day one. We know that some get a surge of enrollment at certain points of the year based upon maybe charter withdrawals, other things that happen out in the community. And on average, they may always get to where they're going, but on the front side, they're short-staffed. And so these are some of the things that we'll try to rectify with a different forecasting model, and, kind of segue to our next conversation topic as we begin looking at the board parameters for class size targets. How do we stay within those target ranges, because kids come to us as wholes versus fractions, but we're always going to be going back and forth on, fractions of allotments for dollars. And, this is where we have to get very creative, at the school level. But I think the more we work with our individual schools on their site-based projection forecasts, I think we can take that into account to have better stability in our class size targets as well. So just want to extend a little bit more off of the question.
Thank you. Was there more about the class size, Jonathan, but I didn't want to cut off, did you want to talk more about the class size targets also? Okay, Jonathan.
Yeah, before we get to class size targets, I'm just curious, the last column is the estimate for this year, and you do have the actual enrollment for kindergarten, right, being a little bit shy of that estimate. With regard to the rest of the classes, are we, how close are we to that estimate? Do you have a sense? Are we approaching those numbers?
Right now, we are. It's kind of right before school.
Pretty
There's a lot
fluid
of
right now.
families
Yep.
that are kind of doing their last minute enrollment. So we'll know a little better probably when
2
school
weeks.
starts. Then we'll have a better idea of who is actually going to show up.
Yeah.
And again, with COVID, it's been kind of a challenge. Families have made other options, whether they wanted to have full-time learning. And when we were in distance learning, families may have chosen other options because they wanted the full-time learning, and maybe that worked for them, and maybe it didn't, and so we may see some of those families come back. But again, we're kind of waiting until school actually starts to get a better idea, and then we can make whatever adjustments we need to make.
Count them when we see the whites of their eyes.
Anybody else? Mary?
I know I've asked this before, but can we kind of estimate the in-district versus out-of-district, just because of the volatility, the more greater propensity for the volatility in that area? Is that going to be a possibility? And I know I asked this recently, and I'm not asking you to be prepared tonight.
Yes, we can. Again, when we look at the historical data, the out-of-district students has been about, this past year, 18%. If you look at historically over the last 4 years, it's been between 14 and 15%. So it's a little higher this year. But we've also had more students as a percentage leave the district than we had in the past. We're about 17% of our students leave the district. So it's a little higher than what normally happens. So again, it's kind of those ins and outs. But we can look at historical data and make some assumptions on what the next 3 to 5 years are going to look like.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Okay, did you want to take some time for class size discussion?
Absolutely, Emily. I'll let Emily share some context around that, too.
Thank you.
When we were reviewing this with senior leaders, we thought it'd be a good opportunity to bring forward the class size targets and an update on the elementary average class sizes as well, since this is significantly impacted by our enrollment. And as Dr. Thomas mentioned, we have some schools who have enrollments at different times throughout the year. So just wanted to present this slide that you've seen before to keep it in front of the group, that we are on average at 23.65 class size throughout our elementaries. And we're closely watching 7 sections that are at discussion cap.
Comments or questions for Emily? Mary?
Do we have any of the elementary schools, particularly because of the, where they sit as far as the geographic boundaries, that tend to be the most, have the highest class sizes or have the highest change percentage?
I'm not sure about the highest change percentage. That's something that we could definitely look into. And we have the same class targets for all of our elementary buildings, so we are looking at that across the board, but I will definitely look into that percentage change and get back to you on that.
Well, the reason why I just bring that up is because we have kind of 2 border schools that have traditionally been the most kind of volatile up and down depending on how things are going. So you got one that is the closest to Savage Burnsville, and then you have the other one that's closest to Shakopee. And I know that, traditionally, from what I understand in my years here, that they tend to be the ones that either get the huge influx because of where they are, or they get a percentage that's significantly lower, and it's harder to balance out. You can't do anything about in-district, but I know that that's where we try to use OE to balance it out.
Other comments or questions? All right, thank you, Emily. Next up, Dr. Thomas, operational plan and priority work. And I apologize again for interrupting.
No, that was me. I had the wrong deck pulled up. So just to reiterate briefly, as I came in looking at the priority work that the district had engaged in, I began asking questions about the connection to the work that was declared and how that work was actually having a direct correlation to improve student outcomes. And the general consensus from talking with various building leaders, as well as district staff, and even a couple of board directors as well, I think the general consensus was this was a great body of work to kind of frame the reality, and I would say pre-COVID, I think a lot of things in education changed significantly since COVID. And I think we have recognized our opportunity gaps for various student groups. I would say that, what we saw in terms of relevance and content, curriculum, and I would say even strategies, our pedagogy, having in-person instruction, also now having maybe a permanent demand for some type of online instruction. For many years, most secondaries have been moving towards a one-to-one kind of methodology, but I think from many of my colleagues, superintendent colleagues across the country, their experience is that it's a K-12 gamut that we're now seeing, that it has to be part of your portfolio of school options. And like Tammy was saying, families are making different decisions and different choices based upon what they experienced for these past couple of years. And so, the question was, is the work that we framed out still relevant given some of the significant structural impacts that have occurred as a result of leading through a pandemic? And then I think the internal, more, I would say, central office management question was, are all of the priorities ends or are they means to ends? So that was a big question. And so we asked you all a week or so ago to give us an opportunity to engage our building level leaders through a day-long retreat to review the priority work. And if I could just capture the sentiment of that day, and we'll walk through it more in depth, I think there was consensus that there was a lot of activity happening, but not necessarily connected to what they were declaring as essential at the building level. So there was some disconnect between district level declared priority work and what schools were seeing, kind of on the front lines, if you will, each and every day. So we led them through a process, which we'll outline for you tonight to get their input. I think it really gave us some good themes to consider. So we'll be sharing that with you tonight, and we'll walk you through our SOAR analysis. We also offered a framework for them to align their school improvement plans to where we will land around district improvement or district priority work, so that there's more coherence between what the board is declaring as priority work juxtaposed to what the schools are seeing, come into their classrooms every single day. And then lastly, I think it's about whittling it down and going very deep to maximize the outcomes for our kids. And recognize that a lot of activity, a lot of adult activity may not necessarily transcend to student outcomes. And we want to make sure that we're busy and engaged, but that it's for the right purpose. And so that's the intent of sharing some of our findings with you all tonight, getting your perspectives tonight. We will then go back and merge our conversation this evening with that of our department and school-based leaders. We would like an opportunity to approach the school-based leaders again with a synthesized version of your perspectives from this evening. Again, with a culmination document, a revised document for your consideration, the first business meeting in September. So with that, I will, let's see, I'm going to turn it. First of all, if you go to the first link, these are the current operational plans and priority work for the district. And I will say that what we tried to discern from this document, the strategic direction document, is some of this work that's declared as a strategic direction, which is, let's see, how was it framed to me? If it wasn't on this sheet, it didn't necessarily get funded. So a lot of people were putting their core functional work in here because they needed the dollars to do their work. And so I think it's going to be really important to discern between what's core functional work, it's just the cost of doing business each day, versus this is our strategic priority. We shouldn't have to put something in a plan that's really just, it's a need. It's like the background operating system on your computer. You never think about it. It's there. It's always there. It's the cost of your computer. But the programs that you are saying are priority that you must have to do the work you need, that's where we want to focus on that programmatic side of things. And so I think we will be subordinating efforts in here around strategic directives that currently exist so that we can really highlight, we believe, two core areas that will really rise to the top for our ability to deliver on students. And I would say strategic direction 1, which is increase measurable student learning and reduce achievement gaps as we provide equitable student opportunities through personalized learning and student engagement. It's a mouthful, but we'll work with that as a strategic direction that I think everyone in our retreat resonated with. And then, one second here, I believe it was strategic direction 5, provide a safe, secure, and supportive environment that nurtures the social and emotional well-being of all learners. And a couple of things here. Again, you can have the best laid lesson plan, you can have the best teachers, but if your school culture is not healthy, if your district culture is not healthy, as Peter Senge would say, culture will eat strategy for lunch, dinner and breakfast. Yeah. And so we know that staff and students and our families, our community, when they come into our schools, they want to feel that they're warm, welcoming, safe places that they will entrust dropping their prized possession, their kids, off every single day. And so, again, it's that whole student, whole learner approach that we really want to ensure we are taking, and we believe that that one in and of itself is an end product. And how do we create that learning culture that's going to be conducive for all of our students? And again, not that these other strategic directions are not important. Some of them are just more means to getting to the two that really have a direct correlation onto outcomes for our students. Students are not going to perform well if we don't have a strong connection with families, right? Parents are our students' first and foremost teacher. And we need to honor and understand that and align with that so that we have strong coherence between home learning environments and school-based learning environments. Not to take away from the expertise of Ms. Frederickson and her team, but we know fiscal accountability, that's a given, right? I mean, we should expect that will happen. Now, that's a good departmental goal for her. But as we measure out, to get the resources where they need to be is going to allow us to get to the end product of strategic direction 1 and strategic direction 2. If we have poorly managed resources, if we are, that kind of a thing, we're not going to be able to execute on those two. So I hope you get the gist of the direction we were going for our retreat that day. And I'll close with, I'm not going through every single one of them. I'll close with the strategic direction 4 because I know this is also something as an external candidate who was considering joining the district. This was heavily promoted and nationally recognized. And the question will come into play as to how evident is this in our pedagogy and in our practice. eSTEM is kind of a tag. It's a branding. And again, I'm not taking away any of the work that you all in our community has engaged around that. We're in the process of beautifying the signs of eSTEM on all of our campuses, right? To what extent is eSTEM embedded in the pedagogical approaches that our staff are engaging with our students every single day. Case in point, when I was meeting with the Spring Lake Township Council during my first week or two here and engaging them at their meeting and talking with the community down there, that night at their council meeting, there was a presentation on a local watershed preservation taking place down south. And my question was, here's a perfect example of taking eSTEM and putting it into practice. Like, these are the types of partnerships that we want to ensure that we are exposing our students to, again, in actual experiential learning and protocols, and not just having eSTEM be that brand. Like, we should know what that stands for. What are the deep learnings that our students can be engaged in? And so we want to lead with that, and I understand that the consulting group really talked about what is your brand, what is your identity. Completely agree with that. And if we're going to hang our hats on that, then that needs to be all-encompassing of everything that we're doing, through an eSTEM initiative. So generally speaking, that's the process that we're utilizing with all of our school-based leaders and all of our department leads that particular day to set the context for that. Then we engage them in an analysis protocol, which is our SOAR protocol. And I don't know if we have, is it Sam back there? Okay, yeah, so Sam is going to come forward and walk us through what that SOAR protocol entailed, and perhaps I think maybe dovetailing with Jennifer Zumbusch, whom, by the way, you all have not formally met. So I would like to take this opportunity to introduce Jennifer Zumbusch, who is leading all of our continuous improvement assessment evaluation for the district. Very dynamic leader who has done stuff literally all throughout the country with major institutions and locally here with Carrie at the University of Minnesota, very well-known, reputable agency as well. So comes with a strong research background, and pleased to have her join the Prior Lake Savage Area family as well. So with that, I'll turn it over to the two of you to walk us through the SOAR and the themes that emerged.
Sure. Jennifer, do you want to start with the logic formula, and then we'll go into the SOAR process in terms of that?
Sure. Yeah, if you take a look at the logic model that is currently blank, we have some working drafts of this that has content in it. This is just a structure that we can use to kind of organize some of the pieces that Dr. Thomas was talking about in terms of discerning what is something that we do, what is inputs, starting on the left-hand side is more of the resources, time, staff, and money that we have as a school district, and then differentiating that from activities. So what are we actually doing? What are the things that we are producing? What trainings are people going through? And outputs are kind of the measures of implementation of activities. So here you would think about measuring the percentage of people that participated in something, or the number of people that participated in training, or I was working on this a little bit earlier, and one of the things that came up in our discussion was about the need for common definitions of terms. So maybe an output would be the percentage of staff who can rattle off the definition of a term that we use commonly throughout our system. And that's what leads us to short-term, long-term outcomes. These long-term outcomes, I think we want to think about them as really aligning with the world's best workforce outcomes at the state level. Those are pretty clearly defined as to where we want to go as a system, which includes reducing achievement gaps in that section there. And so then that kind of leaves those shorter-term outcomes, and those are things that would be clear, measurable outcomes that would be predictors or leading indicators towards our world's best workforce goals. So this might be something that we would report back on a quarterly basis, that would be from our FAST data or from some other data sources that we have, that kind of give us a sense of, are we on track for those longer term world's best workforce type goals. And then the impact is really boiling it down at the end of the day, what are we looking for? And those are those two statements that we pulled out of the strategic document as being kind of the things that we're looking for at the end of the day, which is those student outcomes in goal area 1, and then the safe and supportive learning environment for both adults and students. So that's kind of how we looked at it and how we prepared the leadership team to kind of talk about the different goal priority areas during our retreat.
So at the retreat, we took those two impact statements on educational excellence and safe and secure learning environments, and we did a SOAR analysis with it. And SOAR stands for strengths, which is the S, opportunities, which is the O, aspirations, and results. We broke up into teams about 8 to 10 from leadership there, and had a discussion around the two impact statements, and they came up with areas that relates to those 4 categories that are there. Once we did the SOAR analysis discussion, we had a gallery walk where each leaders would walk around looking at what other groups had come up with, and then they had stickers where they would rate areas that were most important to them. So what you see there in the final product of the SOAR analysis there around the 2 impact statements that came out, you see there some of the things that they came up with under those areas there, and then you see rating scales. The higher the number means that the more that the leadership team really valued that statement there as being either our strengths or our opportunities for growth, aspirations, or the results that we're looking for.
Yeah, so I think we were interested this evening in just hearing some of your feedback on this process and the direction we're headed. I think you can see, if you kind of take a look at some of the numbers that are bigger here, there's a lot of pieces around staffing, and that has multiple components to it. And this is, kind of going back to some of the core functional work, like, are we fully staffed? Do we have good retention policies in place? There's also, an ongoing concern of staff attendance, teacher attendance. So those are kind of things that fall into some of that more core functional work. But also under staffing, there's a lot of pieces about strategic professional development and aligning professional development with our strategic priorities, as well as really focusing on teacher appreciation and staff well-being and wellness. So those kind of are a lot of the pieces that came forward during that conversation. In terms of academic priorities, there was definitely the desire to define what E-STEM meant as a district, but also I think what came to the top is the need for a strong implementation of our MTSS system, which would encompass both a behavior, an academic component, and an attendance component. We have a lot of the good pieces in place already for that MTSS system at all of our levels. I think it's a matter of just refining and getting a little bit cleaner on some of those pieces. But I think that the MTSS implementation is really something that would kind of fall within that short-term outcome column of something that we know is in place, our strong tier 1, and then our tier 2 and tier 3 identification and intervention system. So that's something that is an example of something that would be a strategic priority that would really lead to those outcomes that we're looking for.
Great. Thank you. Welcome to you, Jennifer, and thank you, Sam. I have some thoughts, but I'm going to open it up to the board first for some feedback. So who would like to begin? Mary, you want to start?
First of all, I think this is great. I guess one of the things that comes to mind, and of course not being part of the process and getting the output like this, obviously there was a lot of things thrown on the wall there, and then people went around and figured out where it was. I'm wondering if when everyone was in the room, did you guys write down a definition of some of these terms in here so everyone was on the same page? Because you got a couple things in here that to me seem like they're very high-level definitions still, and I think that's what we're trying to get away from, is having everyone actually be on the same page and understand.
There was a lot of discussion before we went into the gallery walk activity, and also we had some reflections as well. There were some talk about how some areas came as a strength in someone's document, and others came, and that same piece went in as a weakness in other people's areas. So there were a lot of discussions around everything that was said there, both during the process and afterwards as well.
I would also add that, going back to what we were saying earlier, how I define quality became a conversation as I floated through all the different groups, kind of that inter-rater reliability of how we understand this, like PBIS or MTSS, positive behavioral intervention supports, or multi-tiered systems of support. If I have a fundamentally different definition or a way of interpreting that to be successful than you do, again, it goes back to we're both working hard, but we could be paddling in opposite directions for all we know.
Right.
And so I think the calibration conversations that were occurring that day to get onto the same page of alignment to say, this is what it would mean to have a high quality MTSS system put into place. That's the next level of work that we would go to really define that excellence. Then from there, we can put together measurement protocols as to saying, and so how is this school achieving steps towards that? Are they in that learning stage? Are they in that proficiency stage, et cetera? So I think that might get a little deeper to what you were inquiring about that particular day.
It was the definition of the terms, because, and again, not being part of the system, not being part of the process, I've seen that happen over the years, is that everyone thinks they're going in the direction, but they have a different definition for even the words used in that particular objective, and I think it's really important that we come onto that. But I also wanted to play on the answer that you had, Sam, which happens to all of us, which is a really good exercise to come to an understanding, is the same, maybe 50% of the people thought it was a strength and 50% of the people thought it was a weakness. Were there any patterns that came out of that perception? In other words, was it elementary to high school and the grades there? Was it based upon demographics? I mean, was there any patterns?
I didn't see any patterns that were there that came out during that. It was more so topic specific, and I think it happened a little bit more on the safe and secure learning environment, as maybe we're looking at more of an operational way, is to having all the materials and facilities available for safe learning. And then if you're looking at it towards more of a social emotional learning way, we were looking more at instruction and relationship building. So there was some disconnect there, but I think my personal opinion on that day, being here for 2 years, I found the power in that we were all talking about 2 impact statements together versus 10 different priority works separately.
Yeah, I would also say they were heterogeneous groups by design. We know that elementary and secondary will differ in terms of how they approach the work, but we wanted to make sure we didn't have an elementary directive and a secondary directive. We're all one system. Kids and families span K-12. So to surface the priority work, it was in a heterogeneous methodology. I will say when the built teams came the next week, if I have my weeks right, that's when we went by level to further begin to unpack this work to say, okay, at the high school level, and I'll just, not to out the high school, but remember this vividly from that day of the built teams, building instruction leadership teams. They carried the attendance priority forward into their built conversations and began identifying where the gaps and what it looked like for them at the high school, which is fundamentally different than what it looks like at the elementary level. So that was that assured me that heterogeneous approach surfaced the shared target. How you get to that target is going to be unique to your level. So that's just one case in point. I would say that many of the elementary schools looked at the shared topic of multi-tiered systems of support significantly differently than secondary. All right, so when you start, that's where you started to hear a lot of the personalized SEL conversations happen, but then at the secondary conversation, same target, that was the conversation about counselor ratios, right? So they made it their own by level the following week to carry this work into their built workshops.
Mary, if you don't mind, I'll just see if anybody else has comments, and then I'll come back to you.
No, he answered mine. I was curious how you broke it down, eventually getting to how it affects each situation differently.
Yeah, and I would say, again, just coming in, I didn't have the carryover from last year, but all the teams were looking at their school improvement plans that they kind of had about 85% set, reviewing some embargo data, looking at the priorities that came from that retreat to say, what's our plus delta here? And how are we going to go further in this that's continually raising up as a priority for us in this area? So again, I think, again, informal feedback, we didn't do an exit survey with the built teams that day, but the informal feedback that we received, and you all can talk about anything that you heard as well, but that came to my ears was, one, thank you for narrowing the scope. You gave us a shared target. Generally felt lighter, like I can see where we're trying to go now. So those are some of the themes that, and again, this is unsolicited staff coming up to me all throughout the day at that workshop, just getting that anecdotal feedback from them.
Jonathan, go ahead. Oh, and Julie, did that answer what you needed? Okay, Jonathan.
I'm curious, as I looked through the different characteristics or the different items that are on here, I don't know if you can speak to this or not, but I'd love to hear just a little bit about what the discussion was about the concept of switching from instructional excellence to learning excellence. That caught my eye, and it was interesting that it had a bigger number.
It was one of our new principals that joined our team that brought that forward this year.
Yeah, that was a bit of a spirited debate that we had afterwards. I think, and you can jump in, but there was pros and cons of using the different terminology. I think the idea of the current language is to focus on the adult behavior that is required to impact student achievement. But I think the other side of it was more the continual improvement, like growth mindset. So it was a proposal to change the language that's currently in the strategic priorities, and I think we had a solid discussion and people that kind of fell on both sides. But I think the heart of it was, where are we, and this kind of goes back to the definition question, how do we define things and what implications do we give when we use certain words or use certain definitions? So I'm not sure if it came to a conclusion, but I think the general read of the room was probably to keep it the same as it has been, just to focus on the adult behavior.
And ultimately, we want to empower both. We want to empower good instruction that meets the needs of every student.
Yeah.
And we also want to empower the learning as well, the personalized learning to every student also.
One obviously leads to the other.
Right.
So they're interconnected. It was interesting to me to see it framed that way. Learning excellence seems to me to just be a little bit, the paradigm shift is it's a little bit more focused on the student.
Right.
And less on the instruction.
So I would say, if I could just build on that, one, I'm kind of intrigued that you picked up on that distinction, because that was quite a lengthy conversation, and it wasn't something that was really strong here, but the distinction of the focus, if a student isn't learning, is it a student problem, or is it an adult, problem? I shouldn't say that. opportunity versus problem. And you're right, they can coincide together. We really want, I think where we landed that day is, one, we agree, you need both. Students, families have an accountability for their student to be prepared to learn. But it's our responsibility while they're in school to ensure we are differentiating our instruction methodologies to reach all students. Students don't come to us unable to learn, right? They don't. Every student has the ability to learn. They have varying levels or degrees to which they can access learning or grasp contents, but students fundamentally come to school to learn. And it's our job as the adults. And so when we look at attendance, I'll just go there because that's the one that really surprised me. And I've heard it actually from some of our community. We heard it last week from a member of our community. If we are having an attendance issue at a school, what are the students telling us? Okay, what are the students telling us? Yeah, are there going to be students who just don't want to come to school? There are going to be those students. But generally speaking, when you look at attendance rates at perhaps some of our campuses, we need to understand what that's all about to ensure that it goes back to that environment. If that school environment is seemingly out of control, there's not going to be a student who's going to be driven to say, oh, I can't wait to get to that out of control environment every day. They're just simply not. It's the adult culture that sets the tone for that learning environment. And staff will hear a lot more about this next Tuesday. The senior leadership team has heard a lot about this around the moods that we create as leaders. But that's our job. And yes, a student can come with an emotion, but generally speaking, we control the mood. So think of it as the climate we control. And yes, weather can come through, different weather patterns can come through a climate. And that's what really prompted that conversation that day, to really make sure that we were focusing more heavily on the adult culture, setting the context for students wanting to be there and actively engaged in learning.
Just to add one more thing, I also think there's a lot of talk about adults being learners as well. Dr. Thomas has presented himself as our district's lead learner. We're all learners, we're lifelong learners, and our teachers are as well, and we are as administrators. So just the mindset too that there's a lot of continuous improvement that all of us can do as we move along. So I think, maybe it's both. But I think the importance was distinguishing, having a deep discussion about language and what impact that can have. But I think that was the other piece as well, is that students are not our only learners. We're all learners as well. And that really goes back to the professional development that we're all doing as community members to improve ourselves and opportunities for our students. So maybe we adapt the language to include both words or something along those lines, but our students are definitely not our only learners.
Thank you. Anything else, Jonathan?
That's all.
Okay,
and thank you
Stacy
for
or
that
Amy,
detailed
and then we'll go
answer.
back to Mary.
Well, I mean, I know discussion around student attendance, but I think the thing that kind of poked out here for me was staff attendance as well. And I think that was brought out quite a few times in here, was staff attendance. So I also think that consistency, relationship building, making sure we have permanent staff, fully staffed to meet the needs of all learners. I mean, to me, I looked at that and I was like, that's a pretty high percentage in each one of these, and it's 3 or 4 times in here. So,
Yep.
Kids want to be in the buildings. To make kids you want adults in there
Absolutely.
also.
Absolutely.
Making sure that they want to be in the buildings and having that culture for both students and staff.
I think
me.
many of us that day, Director Ruel, were very, I don't know how I would describe that, my feeling that day when I saw that come up over and over again in our groups. And again, somebody who doesn't have the historical context, but talking with folks, it was a tough couple of years, right? And I think we saw the adults, not unlike our students, reach breaking points where they just couldn't see the light at the end of a tunnel. And so I'm not completely surprised around staff attendance being an area that building and district level leadership identified as an opportunity for us. You know, as we enter this, you know, post-pandemic, you know, post-COVID, whatever you want to call it, era of education, we have to think about what it's going to take to ensure that we have a culture in our schools, in our district, that is attractive to staff wanting to be here. I was just at our Scott County scale meeting, you know, with a lot of our elected officials this morning, and superintendents were invited in the region to participate, and a dominant conversation point today was the inability to attract staff on every level, not just teachers, administrators, paras, I mean, just every level. Food services are being decimated. And we know that given, I mean, even our colleagues to this, to the east of us, I guess, Bloomington, used to be probably one of the most competitive districts in terms of pay on a variety of positions. And they are losing people to the corporate world to go into with, you know, one person gave an example. They left teaching after they just got their degree because they can make $70,000 a year as a manager in training program at Walmart. And so we're in this very unique time as a K-12 industry to best understand how to attract and compete. You know, these are public dollars paying for some of the most precious functions in the world, you know, helping generate our future leaders. And there's finite resources at the public level to compensate in comparison to what somebody could go into the private sector for. And that's a real issue. And so Scott County is concerned, you know, we saw what the closure of schools did to our local economies. And if we can't revive that attractiveness to come into education, and we're seeing it in our rural colleagues right now, 5 years from now, this metro area is guaranteed to see a significant regression of K-12 positions being filled, job shares and things of that nature, and it gets less and less attractive. And so I think this is where, you know, as board governance, even as community, this is where we begin to lobby and really help understand how are we going to ensure that the K-12, you know, systems here in our state are viable, because it will have a significant, you know, second and third order economic effect. Just as an example, so again, attendance, we got to have these places and have a workload that I think many are, you know, again, there's a lot on people's plates. And so I remain optimistic that as we're coming into, you know, out of that pandemic era of crisis, you know, management, to really be able to focus back on core academics. That's what our teachers love. That's what our communities are looking for. And that's our bread and butter. And so getting our focus there is going to heavily begin to re-engage learners, not just have people come to school, but re-engage learners of all ages, adults as well as students.
You good? Mary, thank you for, I just wanted to make sure everyone else had a chance. Thank you.
No, thank you. You actually answered two of my questions, and one of the questions that didn't come up was, I also saw speckled throughout here was multi-year. And I know that, you know, a couple of the issues that have come up in the past has been the transition and the feeding and the knowledge transfer of where the students are between elementary to middle school to high school, and then what they're seeing in the middle and the high school, and actually having a circuitous learning effect back into the elementary. We've kind of operated almost in silos once in a while, and I was kind of curious. There's several references to it, but it doesn't seem to be elaborated on. Of course, we're only getting a couple words per section here. So I didn't know if you could add anything to conversations that happen within the multi-year or the cohort planning that goes in a continuous function between K through 12.
I'm actually trying to recollect the continuous, from that day, if it was more explicit. And I'm not capturing that from my groups in the fashion that you're asking, Director France. Are any of you or?
Multi-year in terms of just collaboration, is that?
Yeah,
between the
collaboration
different, grade
and
levels?
learning between the different levels. So, for a while, we had a lot of work. When we started the MTSS program, for instance, we started at the elementary level. And that didn't really translate into the middle school, into the high school. And we knew that was a gap. Of course, the pandemic didn't help. But then there was some talk that I know that we were deficient in actually saying, okay, what is the middle school experiencing that the elementary can learn from, and then going into high school and having that continuous flow of building upon the student at each level and passing that knowledge on with the students into the middle school and into the high school. So they didn't like start over, like
Sure.
in a new.
I got you. So it's the vertical teaming component.
Yes.
Sorry, I'm hearing what you're asking now. Dr. Edwards, you want to speak to some of that? Actually, there wasn't so much the focus of that day's retreat, but you probably have the historical component of what
Yeah,
Dr. Francis meant.
it wasn't at the retreat, but it has been in some of the planning, and I just want to share a couple of the things that came out at last week's built retreats at each of the levels as well around that. So for example, the middle school is restructuring their learning team times this upcoming school year to include some, I wouldn't say go so far as to say going back to teaming, but creating opportunities for those teaming conversations that we had many years ago when we had team time built in. And utilizing their learning team for cross-curricular teachers to come together. We've had our learning teams predominantly at the secondary level based upon their content area. So sixth grade math teachers getting together. Well, they are going to incorporate a cross-curricular where sixth grade math teacher, English teacher, and they're actually scheduling students more in that capacity as well. Likewise, at the high school, with our BAR program, we're entering our third year of implementation of the BAR program. And you might recall we added a BAR coordinator position last spring, and we're excited about the conversations that those teams will now be able to have facilitated by that person. So we're scheduling our students, because we know certainly ninth grade as a difficult and challenging transition year. So back to some of the comments that Dr. Thomas had made around attendance and tracking of that, utilizing our tools. And then at the elementary level, there has been and will continue PST. Last year we had a focus on our problem-solving teams, and that was a K-12 focus. And some of the elementary conversations in the built this past week hinged around what steps they took or improvements they made to their PST model, problem-solving team to identify students, and the usage of our data. We didn't spend a whole lot of time talking about that here when Jenny was up here, but we have a new data tool, the Educlimber data tool that we are beginning to introduce to our leadership teams as well to help them make better decisions and to support the students.
If I can just add, the discussion around collaboration and breaking down silos has always been important in education, and it was important as well too. I've heard it often here in Prior Lake last year. And this process here, it was acknowledged over and over again that being able to come together and talk about, two different impact statements as a whole group in heterogeneous groups allow for that collaboration and breaking down silos. And this carried on into streamlining of our site improvement plans as well too, and a better data tool with Educlimber So we have a lot in place right now to break down those silos and continue that collaboration and vertical alignment.
Thank you.
So just to, in a nutshell, the multi-year comments in here was not fifth, and you mentioned like sixth grade teams, middle school teams. I think what I was thinking it was, of course, without a definition, was that, when elementary goes into, let's say, middle school, does the sixth grade ever talk back to the fifth grade teachers and say, okay, here's what we saw this year, this is what we're not getting from you, or this is what you did really well with, and therefore everyone's planning for that next stage, even if they're in different buildings or different levels within the educational continuum.
Yeah, and actually, I'll refer back to the PST comment I made. Those notes from PST travel from year to year, and so that transition that you refer to from 5th to 6th grade, likewise from 8th to 9th grade, as we worked to develop a more K-12 systematic approach to our PST problem-solving teams, we did make note, or made sure that those notes did, and transition notes did pass on from level to level.
Anything else? Okay, I'll just add a few comments. Thank you to everybody for this huge undertaking. I would just like to say that it took some courage and some time to say we are going to take a step back and we're going to come together and look at it from up here, and then obviously at a very detailed level as well. What I am most impressed with here is that this appears to be, to me, a streamlining to get outcomes and be clear about outcomes, but even more exciting is the synthesis or integration of everything from board level to DSC level to building level, all the way down. And to have everyone that much more cohesive and in tune, and as Mary was talking about, moving through the lines. This is a board who likes to be in the classrooms, especially when it's not COVID and we're allowed in more often. And so that's one way we get a snapshot of what's happening on the ground. But to have you coming together and bringing this forward and prioritizing and bringing it back up and making a recommendation to us about how we can fulfill our government's role, I just feel like that's such a team effort, and I'm grateful to you for that. And I also appreciate the effort to work on the definitions and to clarify, so we are all, again, through the whole, from the board table through, we're all clear on what that work means, and it's hard to expect our stakeholders to understand what we're talking about when we say that if we aren't all agreeing on it. So if we're talking about different terms, I appreciate that. So this was very intensive. I suspect there's a lot more work coming, and I'll turn it back to you at this point, Dr. Thomas.
Thank you, Chair Nelson. I'll just say that, in a very short period of time, to pull together a lot of leaders throughout the district, it gave us a sense of where the pressure points were. It also allows us to get your input and feedback, and I just welcome that over the next couple of weeks as we now go into operationalizing the priorities, the two core areas, so that they're worded in a fashion that they're measurable, then building out metric frameworks for those two priorities. We would like to bring that back before our building level leadership as well, who in turn are working with their builds. We have folks coming back now, and so we'll have ample time to get additional, I think, Jonathan, you had spoke about getting to that teacher level and that more granular level last time we spoke here. And with staff now coming back, we're going to have more access to getting that perspective. And again, not abandoning the totality of the work. A lot of this will be put into our core functional work, but we'll be highlighting and reporting out on what really matters for outcomes for our students. And so with this conversation tonight, that lets us know we're in the right direction to now go deeper into the actual analytics of putting together those metrics that we can put into our quarterlies, and so that logic model again, and there's a variety of iterations we can use, but logic model is where we'll then pull from that we can then generate quarterly reports for the board, and to be able to keep you and our community abreast as to here are the 2 priorities that we really wanted to focus on. How are we looking at that every quarter of the year, so that we can progress monitor and make those adjustments along the way. This also, going back to Director Francis' point about that vertical teaming process, we can then begin to see, okay, it's a certain grade band that is really accelerating. We can really start to dig into that, say what's happening at 5th grade, for example. Or if we see that handoff on the key transition points are really, seeing a slump and then we spike back up, what are we missing at that key transition? So which I think it guides, and Dr. Edwards could probably speak to this more, but with our 6th grade and freshman academies that are starting this year, again, those strong starts are critical for our students to be successful at those key transitions. And so I think that gives us now an opportunity to guide that discussion too at that vertical level. I'll turn it back to you. That's all I had for that topic.
Thank you, everybody, for the time, the work, and the great discussion this evening. We look forward to following through with this. Next up, we do have a board policy. There are no new policies for review at this time to be brought forward. There are no policies in addition for a first reading. We do have a few policies listed as a second reading that will come forward for a vote at the next business meeting in September. I do want to make a note that Policy 515, Protection and Privacy of Student Records, a few of you have called out, and Dr. Thomas is aware of that. MSBA, the Minnesota School Board Association, has recently, just last month, updated their advised policy for that. And so I've been asked that we will remove that for reconsideration in light of that and bring that back after it's been reviewed. Otherwise, we will come forward with the other policies for a vote. Are there any other questions on those policies at this point before they would come forward? Okay, so, I'm sorry, Mary, did you have one? No.
It's a dumb question, but, so 515 will go for revision, won't come back as a first reading then?
Correct. We'll come back because essentially it'll be a new.
All redone?
Mhm.
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Based on that advice. Okay, great. All right, thank you. Next up, any superintendent relations or updates from you?
Just some informational, not updates, but
Got it.
I'll go on to the informational.
Thank you.
So we are about to start school in a few weeks, and I think top of mind for many is the fact that are we going to be able to keep our schools open? What's going to happen with COVID and things of that nature? And this is where it's very unpopular to be a superintendent. It's not a fun place to be when you are left at the whim of public health officials that might oftentimes have competing data, and you have to lead in the gray. It's a challenge. But we also have a requirement that our safe learning plans are reviewed every 6 months here in Minnesota. And so we recently met and as our safe learning plan team, comprised of a variety of staff members. And generally speaking, we are going to be moving forward with opening up our schools fully. And we're very excited about that. And we know that we will see cases of COVID and perhaps other communicable diseases, flu, cold, et cetera, coming forward. And I would just say 2 things, and we'll have a more formal write-up that will be going out to families. One, with regards to COVID, we will follow recommendations from the CDC in terms of if you do test positive for COVID, the recommendation is that you quarantine for 5 days. We also have an illness policy that allows students to return after being fever-free, symptom-free, without medication for 24 hours. And we're going to allow for families to make some decisions as well. And so I would just, like anything, and this is really a message to our families, helping us keep our schools open. If your student is sick, please don't send them to school. And to our staff, if you're sick, please don't come to work. Err on the side of caution if you need to, but we really want to make sure that we have continuous learning this year and minimize the levels of disruption and really pushing out responsibility with our staff and our families to make the right decisions and the choices for their family. But that's essentially how we're going to be going into this year. Should we see any kind of significant spikes and increases, and you all know it was a roller coaster of a past couple of years of ups and downs. We also know, like I said, there's monkeypox and who knows what might be next on the horizon. I think we're going to be managing a lot of different things coming into our schools. We will be safe. But again, I am committed to keeping our schools open and keeping learning continuous. But again, we will keep our environment safe. Our cleaning protocols, we still have a strong regimen for keeping, flat, high-touch surfaces cleaned on a regular basis. We still have ample masks should families or students or staff want to wear one and forgot. We do have those available if they choose to do so. And again, I think we're going to be living in times where that choice is going to be made, and we're going to see many who aren't wearing masks. And again, not wearing or wearing them, mask shaming is not something that we'll tolerate. That's a choice that families and individuals are making. And we're going to support that here as well. So those are my updates on our Safe Learning Plan. Again, there will be a formal letter coming out, around the protocols, giving some hyperlinks that families could go to and staff can go to, referencing some of the recommended guidelines and things of that nature as well. But generally speaking, I wanted the board and our community to know that by the time we would actually report on this, we would actually be in school for about 2 weeks. So I wanted to give you that in advance.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments or questions with that? Okay, great. There were no forms submitted for public forum this evening. So at this time, we will be adjourning our study session to transition to a closed meeting. The meeting will be closed in accordance with the open meeting law, Minnesota Statute 13D.03, for the purpose of discussing negotiation strategy. Thank you, everyone, for coming this evening.